Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Siciliano. I'm the MD of Tiger Recruitment, and today we're going to be talking about women in leadership. This is something that's really important to us at Tiger because aside from our CEO, we're an all-female leadership team. This is also a topic that's really important in line with the diversity conversations that we've been having as well. So it's something that we really want to focus on today. We are so pleased that you've joined us today, and what we want to do is kind of make this a bit of a fluid conversation, get as much of your sort of input and insight as we can today. For everyone that has joined us today as well, there will be opportunities for you to ask us questions using the Q&A function. Please, if you've got any comments that you'd like to add throughout as well, feel free to add those as well. And any questions that do go unanswered, you can email us at tiger-recruitment.co.uk, and we'll get back to you with answers on those as well. So I'm going to start off by introducing our experts we've got joining us today. First off, we have Denise OBE. Denise is a Chief Executive of the Hampton Alexander Review. This is an independent body which aims to increase the number of women on FTSE 350 boards and in leadership roles. Her previous experience includes Chief Executive of the Davies Review and senior executive roles with organisations including National Grid, the BG Group and British Gas. She is a business coach, mentor and passionate supporter of women in business. We have Emma Sinclair, MBE, joining us today as well. Emma started her career in investment banking before becoming the youngest person to float a company on the UK Stock Exchange. She is the co-founder of Enterprise Alumni, the world's first scaling tech company with a 50-50 gender balanced ownership and founding team. Emma is also UNICEF's first business mentor and was awarded an MBE for entrepreneurship in 2016.
Emma started at McDonald's, not in investment banking, in case anyone thinks I'm very fancy.
And finally, we have Sam Collins, Dr. Sam Collins. Sam gets an extra shout out as well because she's joining us from LA, so it's very early in the morning for her. Now, Sam is an award-winning woman in leadership expert, a social entrepreneur, a keynote speaker, coach, and best-selling author. She has worked with female leaders from global corporations, small businesses, government and non-profits over the past 19 years. She has contributed to publications such as the Financial Times, The Guardian, and the BBC World Service. She has also been named one of the top 200 women to impact business and industry by Queen Elizabeth II. So thank you to our experts. What we want to do is sort of go straight into this, is looking at first off the state of play and where we are at the moment. So Denise, I'm going to start in directing this question to you. What are some of the key trends that you're starting to see from FTSE 350 businesses and their reporting of women in leadership this year?
Okay, well, thanks, Rebecca, and fellow panelists and everyone who's listening in today. I think it's going to be a great session, and I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to talk to you. You know, the question of sort of where we are now is a really big question, actually. And let's start with, in the UK, I guess this journey has been going on for some 10 years, seriously. Lots of initiatives and sort of side shows before that, but only really got some traction and did we get serious about this and put a proper formal framework in place to monitor women's progression in FTSE listed companies a decade ago. So where are we? We started there in a fairly dreadful place with women at about 10–11% on boards and women in leadership much worse. And if we roll the clock on through two reviews, two 5-year reviews, we're now looking at just about 35% women on FTSE 100 boards and 33% on FTSE 350 boards. And the women in leadership, we're just about to collect that data actually. We collect it once a year and government analysed that data for us, although the Hampton-Alexander review is an independent review. We're just about to take a look at where that is. Last year it was, 15 months ago, it was around 30%. So we're hopeful of seeing women. That's a leadership group of about 20,000, arguably the biggest roles in leadership that we capture. And women were at around 30%. I'm hoping we'll have seen quite a bit of progress in this year, but of course, COVID has come along and hit all of us sideways. So we'll have to see what impact that has had, and I know we'll be talking a bit about that later. But what are the trends that we're seeing? We're seeing companies, the target we have is 33%. We're seeing companies aim now for gender balance, actually. Around a third of those companies are already at 40% or above. So that minimum threshold that we set is not really where those companies that are trying hardest or have been working on this longest currently are. We're seeing bulk recruitment of women, so advertising for a post and recruiting 2 or 3 women in one go, as opposed to the kind of one in, one out that we've seen. We're seeing more women than ever come through into FTSE chairs, FTSE SID roles, these kind of deputy chair roles, and around a third of all FTSE 100 chairs or deputy chairs are now women. So that is, every year these markers are moving up. More women FDs, sadly, not more women CEOs.
Yeah.
That very, very top job in leadership where we're not seeing the progress there that I would expect us to be seeing by now. But companies really turning their attention to inclusion. It's not just about recruitment anymore. It's about inclusion, creating truly inclusive cultures in the workplace, and about retention of their senior women, as opposed to just the kind of revolving door that we've seen in some of the early stages of this. A lot of focus on behaviours too, which goes with the inclusion piece.
Excellent. So it sounds like there are some really promising figures coming out that we're moving in the right direction. Sam, one for you, like some of the things that we're seeing come out of the US are kind of going, against that, or not so much, in terms of women in the workforce, but just more the numbers of women that have dropped out of the workforce during the pandemic. Do you have any comments around that?
That sucks.
Yeah.
Start with that. Congratulations, Denise, on the work that you're doing. I don't underestimate how challenging that has been the last 10 years. So
thank you. You're right.
Yeah.
Challenging.
Incredibly challenging. I mean, I have some insights, but
who would have thought this subject was that challenging? But it really is.
It really, really is. So the fact that it's not where we want it to be. I thought I'd start off with a Ruth Bader Ginsburg quote, because why not, right? At 6 a.m. in the morning. But when asked how many women should be in the Supreme Court, there's Emma's nodding. How many did she say, Emma? Big fat 9.
Not everybody, but
9.
One.
Everybody, yes. And because that's how many representatives there are in the Supreme Court in the US. And, she was always asked, but shouldn't it be 50-50? Shouldn't it be a third? And she was like, no one ever questioned why it was 100% men. So I do look forward to that. I really do. Having said that, I think it's, across the globe. We did an event last week with women from 60 countries. I'm not really seeing that much difference anywhere. Of course, it's more extreme when you live in a developing world country and you start having food issues as well as all the other issues that we're seeing. Yes, 4 in 10 women are opting out of the workforce in the US, and there's good reasons for that. And they, look at the timing. It was August, September. What happens in August, September? Kids are meant to go back to school. They didn't, So, I mean, half the schools in the US are not, are in virtual attendance. So I have 3 kids at home and I work for myself. So, you could argue that it's a bit easier, but it's bloody challenging, So I think that so many women are either opting out or have to, are losing their jobs. We're seeing women in more female-dominated professions, which we always love to see, education, healthcare, hospitality, being more adversely affected by COVID. And so what really sort of makes me frustrated but smile at the same time is that this has always been a really big issue. This isn't any new news. This has always been really tough for women. And COVID, as terrible as it is, has highlighted it, has sort of shone a light on it. And finally, we're seeing more wide media coverage and not just the sort of more, smaller women's groups talking about these issues. So I think that's a good thing. And I think as dire as the picture can look when you start reading and looking and, being part of it, it's also quite, it might sound a strange word, but sort of exciting in some ways, because I think there's lots of possibilities for change, lots of possibilities for entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, cooperative business, collaborative business, combined with all the good work that is happening in the large corporations that do the work that they do. So yeah, for 6 a.m, that's what I've got. Give me a minute.
And Emma, how would you say that compares to what we're seeing in the UK?
Look, I mean, I'm a natural optimist because I'm an entrepreneur. So on a positive note, I guess, whether it's UK or US, there are some good things. Flexible working is likely here to stay. But as Sam says, the picture's a bit dire. I mean, I think I can really only speak to my world, which is the world of entrepreneurship, people who've started and are growing businesses, whatever their size is. And, at the smaller end of the scale, women are clearly collateral damage right now, caregivers, part-time workers. In the business world, some things that I've noted, the requirement to report on gender pay gap was suspended earlier in the year. And I just think, you can't track what you don't, you can't comment on, and you can't track what you don't track. So I felt like that was a step backwards here. In my world, at the start of COVID, the government announced the Future Fund, which was about 250 million of treasury cash for innovative companies facing financial difficulties. The British Business Bank would not agree to track diversity metrics in the Future Fund, which meant that it was likely to exacerbate the landscape in my world, which is that sort of only 1% to 2% of women that build businesses receive financing. So I guess, I can't comment on differences because actually my business is on both continents. My head office is actually in the US. I'm in London today though. But, Jacinda Ardern promised in her victory speech to build back better. I think that's what she said. And I think the tagline of the Women's Equality Party and Catherine Mayer, some of you may be familiar with her, have been using is the only way to do that is to build back equal. And I think, as Sam says, the perhaps ironic, I don't know how to be positive about this, the ironic upside of this is that we've highlighted more and continuous problems and all the wonderful progress made in so many areas of diversity, which I celebrate and applaud, feel rather glacial. And I am quite bored of glacial progress, if I'm honest.
Yeah. And I think one of the things you touched upon there, Emma, with Jacinda Ardern's landslide election victory, we are seeing a lot as well about, the role of women in political leadership roles and the impact they're making, and, whether they are leading us through this pandemic better than some of the male leaders are. Denise, I might sort of throw this one to you. Do you have any thoughts on that? And if it's going to change the way, women in leadership are viewed?
No, I think there's been lots of things that have come out of the pandemic, and Emma's just articulated many of them really well. I do think the enforced use of technology and work from home will, in the long run, be very helpful for not just men, but also for not just women, but also men, actually. And, part of this has to get to where we have working families with young children, to men playing an equal part in parenting. And for some reason or another, that's not happening yet. And I think that's an interesting question to pose. Why not, actually, this day and age? The very harsh spotlight that it has shone on the out-of-hours culture that goes on, the travel all around the world, the excessive executive flying to here, there, and everywhere. And how we can work just as effectively, actually, maybe not as pleasantly, but we can do our jobs from home. And I think the whole, whether it's Build Back Better, Build Back Equal, whatever, taking the opportunity of what we've learned here is really important, and we should not lose the insights that we've got. We should not just build back. We should make sure that we really capture those. But I think other things, that whole jacket on the back of the chair, there are some good things to come out of it, and we do have to scratch quite hard to see them, but they're definitely there. And one of them has to be the very strong women role models that we've seen. And when we have seen some fantastic women role models coming out, being combining, strength, decisiveness, and empathy, all of which at a time like this in a global pandemic are much needed and really valued, actually. And those women leaders have seen their support and their favour grow and grow through that. And I think that's really important. We don't have the same examples, sadly, to look at in the British government, and I think that's in itself an interesting question and one for us all to look at. But we are seeing very good role models of women scientists, women in the health profession coming to the fore. And we talk about a gender representation gap, we talk about a gender pay gap, but the gender say gap, i.e., are we hearing women's voices in the same degree, to the same strength, to the same influence as we're hearing men's? And that is a very important area for us to push on in the next few years. But I think this has been really helpful. We know from all the research that women need to be able to look up to senior women role models and aspire to that, and copy some of the things they like and leave some of the things they don't behind. And particularly in public and political life, it's really, really important to see leaders there, not only as role models, but also obviously to see through on the very important policy which can impact negatively on women if there are not sufficient women at the table to make those decisions.
Yeah. That leads me on to sort of the topics around sort of gender balance and gender pay gap reporting. Denise, how do you think employers can make equal gender balance a priority moving forward?
Well, look, we know now, having worked very hard at this subject for 10 years, that there is no silver bullet. There's no kind of top 1 or 2 or 3. You do need to be working hard on all levels, and companies can't start early enough. Those that we are seeing really delivering gender balance leadership, really creating truly inclusive cultures, are companies that have been working on this consistently, thoroughly, from the very top, with some significant cash behind it and resource for somewhere between 7 or 8 years now.
Yeah.
If you're just waking up and just starting on this, it's hard, and there's a lot of catch up to do. But clearly, it has to start with the data. If you don't have the data that says what your representation is of women at every level in the organisation, how you're splitting your pay budget, how you're splitting your bonus budget, of the 25 opportunities that come around in the year, how many of those are going to men, how many of those are going to women? And unless you're managing, of the levers, how many of those are men, how many are women, of your redundancies, how many, unless you're managing at a very micro level all of that data, then you don't know your starting point, and you don't really know what to go at either. So you end up with this sort of splattergun of initiatives, a little bit here, a little bit there, and which are very ineffective, actually. The other thing that's really important these days is leadership, and we know that those companies that have made the most progress, and we've watched some that have made progress and then slipped back, it has been down to the leader or a change in leader.
Yeah.
And when companies that we've watched sat in the doldrums at the in the kind of bottom decile in terms of percentage of women, when the leader changes, i.e. the chair or the CEO, then things change very quickly, and people line up around the leader. So the voice of the leader is really important. But also it needs to be, part of the danger we have now, unlike a decade ago, is that I faced many FTSE 100 chairs. Around a third of them were like, this has got to change, this is ridiculous, it's embarrassing for British business. Another third would sit on the fence and then decide that, let's see if this is just kind of 2011 2012's initiative and it's all going to blow over and I can just keep status quo, happy shit. And another third who basically said, over my dead body.
Yeah.
Over my dead body will I put a woman on my board.
Really? You know, I think to your point on leadership, if you want a bad example, look to the US. You know, I mean, talk about highlighting the worst of the worst. In some ways, it's a good thing because you can look at it and think, I never, ever want to be like that. You know, we are seeing so many great women, though, emerging in the US. And I want to put a call out for great women that are emerging in the government in the UK, because there's a number of them. They might not be at the top yet, but they're doing often invisible jobs, invisibly. I also want to put a call out for entrepreneurs, because I think that often when we think of women leaders, we think of women CEOs, we think of women that are running the FTSE, companies, etc. But it takes a hell of a lot to start and grow your own business. And I think that that is something that we're going to see a huge amount of now. Women who have wanted to do it for a very long time and haven't been able to for whatever reason, or didn't have enough fear behind them. You know, there's so much fear behind it. But I think now, you know, you're going to have to, because you've always wanted to, and it's just not working for you in that culture. The other thing I wanted to say, because I see this so much, there's a strong focus on numbers, and numbers are important, and tracking is important, and how can you measure anything? And we've heard that from Denise Wilson. I think it's absolutely valid. But what about happiness? What about fulfillment? What about balance? And you know, to your point, Denise, we need way more women CEOs, whether they're running a business for themselves, they're running a FTSE, or they're running the country. We have to have more women CEOs. If the world was run by women, it would be very different. I think a lot of men too would go, oh, phew, you know, let's do this together in a different way. And I think now is our chance. And I think that the time for incremental measures and, you know, glacial progress is over. It's got to be the time for extraordinary measures. And we have to remember that businesses are people, and it shouldn't be all down to the HR department or the leadership team or the executive team to do this. It should be down to everybody. I think it's going to be a grassroots corporate business activism movement where many, many more women are going to come out of COVID and say, I'm sick of being so nice. I'm sick of being so diplomatic. I'm sick of like asking for the business case and writing a 25-page document and then getting pushed back by 5 people and just getting distracted and building it again and coming back. Please, can we have diversity? It's really important. And let me tell you why. No, not the right time. It's exactly the right time. It's time for extraordinary measures. I strongly believe that, and I'm excited by it. I think it's a whole new women's movement emerging that isn't UK, that isn't US, that is global. And I'm excited to be part of it. I'm excited to be alive right now.
Excellent. And Emma, your business prides itself on your 50-50 gender balanced ownership and founding team. Is that something that you set out to do from the beginning?
I mean, a couple of things about that, and a couple of things about Denise and Sam's comments, where I'm just like, you know, nodding my head and, you know, I'm outraged from W1 right now. I think we're preaching to the converted, because I had a look at all the attendees and almost everybody is female, and we're a female group here. So I think we're all, you know, clearly in the camp of diversity at the table leads to better outcomes, and we're all agreed with that. My 50-50 cap table, I mean, the very short story behind that is, you know, all the narrative around female founders, women that lead businesses that are entrepreneurial, tech funding and financing are perpetually negative narratives. It's essentially 1% of money goes to women. Sometimes you find 2% of money goes to women. 7% of angels are women. It's all so perpetually negative that sometimes I thought to myself, negativity begets negativity. There's nothing positive to quote, because there's nothing positive to say about anything even remotely healthy, balanced, or loosely less imbalanced. So I'm going to build a statistic and just do it myself. It's kind of like with my IPO. I mean, that's a different and longer story, but I've had a lifelong obsession with stock markets. I was always reading about, you know, all the stats about no women on board. So I was like, you know, I'm going to IPO my company so that I change the statistics. I remember saying that at 29 at my first kind of grown-up conference in the auditorium of Berwyn, Leighton, Paisner, and a lot of people raising their eyebrows as I essentially was like, that's why I did it. So I thought I'd kind of do a sort of semi-similar thing with my financing when we got beyond only taking a couple of million, and thought, I'm going to be able to do this. The women of the world are going to rise up, and the ones that can are going to open their wallets, and they're going to help finance me, because I have a credible, have a very credible business. We do something credible, market leaders in our space. So it's not like I'm asking for, cash to fund, something that has no prospects and doesn't have any proof of that it makes sense. And because I thought to myself, if I'd exited and I had this idea to create a positive sort of statistic, I would be like, here is my checkbook. How much would you like to give yourself? It wasn't like that at all. And actually, I had a real challenge finding women to invest. And I actually sort of, you never expect anyone to, but you sometimes think certain powerful groups will point you in the right direction. It was an emotional roller coaster. It was psychologically grueling. It took me infinitesimally longer than a normal fundraising. I was so personally, emotionally disappointed by people that weren't even remotely even amenable to giving me some ideas. And the whole thing was very, very difficult. And I thought to myself, look, I've done it. I've done it for the women. I've done it for a positive statistic. I'm never doing that again. But of course, every time I'm doing a financing, I'm like, well, I've got to do it again, because this time when I IPO, I want it to be very big, and I still want it to be 50-50. Yeah. So look, I mean, I did it. It was very hard. It was upsetting how hard it was. But at least I have something positive to say in a conversation, because otherwise it's just, it's just glacial is a compliment to the set of statistics in my world. If you're moving at a glacial pace, you're just outperforming most other areas of industry, as best I can tell.
Yeah.
Emma, that's amazing you did that. And I know probably people say that to you all the time, like, that's amazing, good for you kind of thing. But no one can really understand what you went to. But you're a pioneer, as Denise is a pioneer, and I'm a pioneer. And when you're the first doing something, it's really bloody hard. We don't think of ourselves that way. But in some ways we are, because no one's really done what you've done before. No one's done what Denise has done before. I mean, we need to own it and say, we're the first, and we're amazing, we're brilliant. And other women will want to do the same thing.
I thought it would be exciting, to be honest. And I also thought, well, we don't do any PR. It will be shared by every woman on the planet. This is a few years ago, when the first stage, I've got over the upset from then now. But it was just a really interesting process around the psychology of that, because I, like probably all of you, spend my life, where it makes sense, on panels talking about diversity, which in itself drives me mad anyway. But it's interesting. There's a lot of chat, especially from the large corporate world, which I know is a world that certainly, Denise, you spend a lot of time sort of looking at. And
well, look, if I just come in there, so just to finish my story about FTSE 100 chairs, when I said a third of them would say, with my dead body, will I have a woman? Today, in answer to your comment, Emma, about chat, there are plenty there. There are probably still a third who are in that chat space. They know, these are leaders of business. They know the right lines to take. They know exactly the right words to say when someone's watching, which is why you have to go back to some extent to representation in the data, because the only way every single, FTSE leader would know the right words to say on this subject now when somebody was looking. But the only way you can tell whether they're actually making progress is, are they appointing women into more senior roles year on year on year? Is that percentage of women going up through the business changing? Are they losing less women every single year than they have? And this comes in, you sort of have to look at it across many lenses, but that is one of the most difficult things to deal with now, when somebody sits and looks at you and says, I get it, I understand it, of course we're trying hard, we've got all these initiatives, and actually their numbers are not moving at all. So that's when they get called out. And I think, just on Sam's point about grassroots, I'm often asked, what is the next thing? Is that higher percentage target? Targets are really important, actually, and have massively driven progress. What is it? Actually, what it is pulling your two comments together, really, in that it shouldn't just be a few of us who are trying really hard. It frustrates me when somebody says, what are you doing? What am I doing? I mean, I'm not in control of who gets appointed to 26,000 leadership roles in the UK, or into team leadership.
You should be, though. You would be amazing if you were.
Denise,
give Denise the power.
But this is what we need, is everybody now to be speaking from the same hymn sheet, and we need people at all levels of the organisation. I'd argue particularly younger men and women to be finding their voice and using their voice and saying, this is enough. Why didn't I get that job? You know, asking, why, what is the pay ratio in my team? Do I get the same? Do I get the same bonus as him? Did I get the same? And asking those tough questions, asking what they're doing about progress, creating inclusive cultures, me, my job, me next. And, you know, and I think people in general are still far too nervous, are uninformed on the subject and the importance of it, and sit for way too long, women particularly underemployed in jobs that they're overly capable of doing, and never really kind of raise their hand. So I do think there's something to put out there on all of us, actually. It is everybody's job to call out inappropriate behaviour, to tackle microaggressions, to point out gender stereotyping, and to ask those really hard questions of their boss and put themselves out there, you know. And why wouldn't we all stand up for women when our friends, girlfriends, wives, sisters, partners are paid less or going to earn less through their career and not given an equal opportunity to higher earning jobs, or any job actually, and will probably more likely to suffer pension poverty through their life? Why wouldn't all men and women be speaking out about that? No, I don't get it. And that's what we need for this next wave to move us on. Not just a few of us, but many.
I hope, Denise, when you write your next report, that it's not called Hampton, Alexander or Davies, it's called the Wilson Report.
Good call.
Very good.
Very good call. I like that.
Sam, I just want to direct this question to you now, and I think this is just tying in with everything we're talking about and that gender pay gap as well. So the Gender Pay Gap report for 2020 reported the mean gender pay gap in the UK at 16.9%. It's improved from the previous year, but what do you think leaders can do to close the gap?
I don't think leaders are going to do very much, to be quite honest. To Emma's point, it's not even being measured anymore. Look, I think that financial worries right now are huge. And we in an event last week when we asked, what's your biggest challenge? Financial concerns came out as the #1 challenge right now. So whoever you are, whatever you're doing, we're all worried that we can pay our rent, our mortgage, feed our kids. So, you know, with that comes a lot of fear. It could be argued very well, it's not the right time now to ask for a pay rise. We're in COVID. And if you did ask, you'd probably get that response. It's not the right time now, you know. Yeah. So I think also that a lot of women are particularly shackled by this. You know, they're in highly paid roles, worked very damn hard to get there. They are often, you know, we women are often the main breadwinner now, or at least a co-dual breadwinner in our family. So it's, you know, it's a really big deal. It's a really big deal. I think that a lot of women that I speak to believe that if they start their own business somehow, that they will make less money. And that's certainly not been my experience. It's not been the experience of the many, many women I know that have made that transition. So I think that sort of a number of myths need to be busted around money. I think that to our, you know, emerging movement, the grassroots movement that's coming on this call right now, I think that it's okay, you know, it's okay. You're okay to ask and find out what your peers are paid. It's okay if you are a consultant to find out. I always find out what, you know, what other coaches are being paid, what other consultants are being paid. I'm always interested. I'm like, wow, really? You get that much? You know, and we can choose to charge those rates. We can choose to do work pro bono. We can, you know, we can do what we like. I think it's good to find out. And then once you're armed with that information, then you can decide what you want to do with it. And it's okay to be angry. It's okay to know, wow, you know, that female peer even, or that male peer is paid way more than me for the same job. It's not right. It's not okay. And it needs to be addressed. And now is not the time to delay. Now is not the time to be like, oh, and start with an apology. I'm really sorry. I know it's COVID, but, you know, can you review my pay? No, I think, you know, we can be polite about it and graceful about it, but we have to address these. If you run a team, do you know how much everyone's paid? You know, if you run an organization, are you clear about it? Most people are very nervous about it. They don't want to look at it really. You know, they don't really want to see it. And so now is a really good time for excuses, isn't it? Oh, we can't do that because it's COVID. You know, we can't do that because of the state of the business right now. Well, now is actually the perfect time to do these kind of things. Yeah. You know, and I think to this point on transparency now, and I just want to address, you know, young people as coming into the workplace, and young people who, particularly young women that are interested in professions that are not traditionally female. I think this is really important. You know, our STEM, STEAM kids out there, you can look at an organization and see how many women are at the top, but it will not give you the full picture. And there are so many ways to access that now. There's so many different websites and social media to find out, how does it feel to work at this place? How does it feel there? Do you have a good old chance of progressing? If you're somebody, you know, many rebellious people don't do so well in the corporate structure because it's not designed for rebellion. It's not designed for people that speak up. It's not designed for people who push back. It's designed for people who don't. And if you do that, it can be career limiting. You could be like sidelined for something, or, you know, just told to, you know, very politely, that it's not always done so overtly these days, you know, like sit down and shut up. But actually, you know, you've got so much more to do. And I think that we need to kind of have a radical, people don't like when I say the word radical, I'm going to say it. We need a radical redesign of how our organizations work. Not so they're just great places to work for women, so they're great places to work for everyone, because you know, everybody's sort of sick of it now. These structures, whether it's the government structure, the education structure, or corporate structures, they were, you know, before COVID, they were falling apart. They were sort of barely holding it together. Big tankers trying to turn around and do something different. Now it's, you know, those holes in the ship are being exposed.
Yeah, absolutely. Emma, question for you now. Like, how do you think businesses can steer away from like tokenistic hiring practices of, you know, trying to just increase the number of women that they have within their leadership roles, and focus on more long-term sustainable changes as well?
Look, I mean, I'm sure all of us have these conversations all the time. I answer this question a lot. Like, the answer is pretty clear, pretty simple. It's not rocket science, and everybody can do it. I guess I'm also being caught on a day where I'm a bit tired and angry about this, because I've had an experience this morning that was just completely outrageous. And I'm always surprised when I come across a situation where, you know, someone doesn't have some sense of perhaps treading extra carefully with me if they're about to say something ridiculous about diversity. So hence my tone. But look, I mean, you know, I belong to an amazing community of businesswomen, entrepreneurs, friends, where when there's a position going, when someone's looking for something, we all share it and suggest someone we think would be fantastic, because it's that whole, it's, you know, the old story of, you know, Christine Lagarde, where she pulled out the list many years ago. I've got no idea whether it's urban legend, but when asked about whether there was a shortage of women for certain types of very senior roles in finance, you know, she obviously had a long list of women that were completely qualified, suitable and brilliant for it. The bottom line is, as we all know, there are plenty of people of all shapes and sizes and genders who are completely capable and maybe don't have the same experience as someone who's been a CEO for the last 45 years, but no doubt have got lots of other experience. I think, so it's looking beyond your immediate circles is the obvious. I think the other thing is this, though, we have to all call spades spades and recognize what does and doesn't work. You know, in my experience, especially in the world of FTSE and everything else, I'm very fortunate to have had lots of lovely opportunities and interviews and conversations about stuff. But here's a few things that I feel quite strongly about noting. You know, typically entrepreneurs are not, certainly ones who are growing businesses, are not necessarily ideal candidates for lots of people on a board, because entrepreneurs tend to call spades a spade and tend to be quite to the point, and sometimes that is a little bit of a terrifying proposition. You know, the prospect of putting a female entrepreneur who has had a very senior leadership role, or a founder or a CEO, therefore has run a P&L into a large enterprise. Again, probably a bit terrifying for lots of reasons, including the old joke that entrepreneurs are completely unemployable because they do things differently. So there's lots of challenges, but there are lots of great people for roles. I see a lot of the same people, not just talking about diversity, a lot of the same women being put into the same roles in certain areas, a lot of women in sort of board roles of public trusts and charities. I am seeing, I will say this though, a positive note. I am seeing a shift in the last few weeks. I've got 3 or 4 girlfriends who've been appointed to boards, who've never been on main boards before, of reasonably sizable businesses, but they fit a demographic that is completely unrepresented. So they have been sought out. And lo and behold, even though they don't necessarily have the world's biggest track record of board experience, they are very competent, have shown they're able to do, set up a business, grow and scale a business, and do plenty of things that other people would find hard. So I do actually, in my world, see signs of change, but I think sometimes, to be a little bit cynical, maybe that comes from a position of marketing and outside, people recognizing, as Denise said, that change has to be made because it's embarrassing. But I'll take whatever reason it is that there is change. But I'm sure we're all a bit exhausted about having this conversation. My final point, I must actually say, is when I did my first grown-up panel, as I used to call it, many years ago, and I remember it was 29 because it was the year I listed my company. I remember a woman called Kate Grussing of Sapphire Partners, who I'm sure is known to a few people listening, talking about something. And I said, well, I've just IPO'd my company and I'm going to change everything and I'm changing the statistics and blah, 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 feeling all excited. But I remember her effectively saying, I felt that way in my 20s and 30s too. I'm now in my 50s. Stuff hasn't really changed. And I remember thinking, oh, no, that's not how it's going to be. I'm going to be the change. My friends are all going to be the change. And lo, 20 years later, well, not 20 years later since I'm 29, but 20 years later or more since I started work, there isn't really any change. So I know that women are funding females. So in my world, it will eventually change when women exit and make a lot of money and can put it back in. But, we talk about all this change and I'm a little bit cynical. I'm like, really seem to be changing.
Right, but look where Denise, and the work that she was 10 years ago. I mean, at 10% was pretty dire, right? And so to be edging up to a third, as historically, when you sort of look back, even to the 70s, the 60s, you still had a marriage bar in a number of organizations. If you got married, you had to leave. So I think in the grand scale of things, it's not fast enough for us, but there is progress being made. And look at what's happening around the world with leaders like Jacinda Ardern. Whereas it used to be like empathy and collaborative skills and focusing on people was all sort of seen as a bit nice to have, perhaps, and soft and women's stuff, whatever. Now these are the skills that are getting us through a major, arguably the biggest health crisis of our century. These are the skills that are getting us through, and I think that this is a really, really good thing. So don't lose hope, Emma. I think there are tons and tons of women sort of on the edge now, on the edge of this, saying, okay. But you see, the thing that's been happening, and I think we're great examples of it right now, is we've all been doing this work quite isolated, quite solo. We've been all, been working really hard. You've been doing, I've never met you two, any of you before. You've been doing your work, Emma, and you've been doing your work, and I've been doing my work. And I think if you've got us all together with all of the great-minded men and all genders out there, I think we've got a hope here. I really do. So let's not give up. And of course, we are a bit tired because we are a little bit older, but there are tons and tons of young women now with that kind of energy that just don't put up with the same, they're just not ready for it. And they're growing up that way. And they're now growing up in COVID. And they're growing up saying, look, this is unacceptable. Why would I even think about doing that. And the skills that they've got are very different and very authentic to them. And I think we're going to start seeing a whole wave of younger people, all genders, doing some really, really, really interesting things.
And Denise,
the Wilson report on progress.
Yeah, look, just to comment on that first, I absolutely agree that supply is not the issue. The pipeline of competent, capable women, in any grade, is full to overflowing. The issue is getting those women picked. Yeah. And we have a big problem getting women picked. So gender stereotyping and bias in the selection process is massive. But, I guess where I would say there's hope, and I'm as frustrated as anyone at the pace of change, and completely surprised, going back to Sam's comments at the beginning, at how hard this was. I honestly thought when I began this a decade ago that this was kind of 2 or 3 years work and we were sorted, and it is incredibly hard. But progress comes in many forms, and it's not just representation, it's also the the network of women that we have created, the fact that we're having this session today with over 100 participants on the call. But even 5 years ago, we couldn't have got this webinar together to have the conversation. And as you say, women supporting women, and just the very conversations like microaggressions, bias in the selection process, we couldn't talk about those things. It's sort of peeling back the layer of the onion. And just to give hope for everybody that's on the call, there's certainly a way to go yet, but we shouldn't underestimate the progress that we've made. Where I see it now is we've got all the issues, murky as they are, out on the table, and we know what they are. They're known issues. We just haven't yet got the wherewithal, the ability, the traction, the time, the appetite from some to sort them. And that's got to be the next drive. And I absolutely agree that and going back to what we said earlier, that the collegiality, the support of women on women, a system of coming together, but also the men playing their part, all those men not being bystanders, being upstanders for women, for colleagues, for the women in their lives, learning the right way to intervene, learning the right language to say, learning how to be a supporter, an ally, and not a bystander or someone who puts their head down, is where the next wave's got to be. We couldn't have had this conversation 5, 6 years ago. And so that's where, young women should take heart that it is all out there. We just haven't yet sorted it. And that's what we've got to do. That's the next piece of work. And we've got to keep going. And I think what keeps us going is young women, is women like Emma and many who will be on this call, because they are impatient for change. They are capable, competent, qualified, and should be fully employed. But what we have to watch, and I go back to the question I posed earlier that I don't have the answer to, is through difficult times like COVID, we've seen some organisations take their foot off the pedal. Very unhelpfully, we saw the government pause gender pay gap reporting for this year, sends dreadful signals, the wrong signals. But we're also hearing anecdotally from many, many women with young families who are qualified in big jobs, often who are the breadwinner in the house, taking on the lion's share of the childcare at home. Yeah. Now, why is that happening? These are clever, strong, educated women who are in modern marriages, modern households in 2020. Why are women allowing themselves, or not fighting stronger for their corner, to have equal parenting in the home? It's hard. We know it's hard in the workplace. The barriers, the issues are complex and compounding. But the home is women's domain, women's environment. Why are they not negotiating a more equal parenting through lockdown? So there's lots of 1 step forward, 2 steps back. But I don't have the answer to that question. My children are now not little ones anymore. Sadly, I really wish they were. They're grown, but I'm puzzled. I'm really puzzled.
Yeah. And Denise, there are a lot of businesses out there that
Rebecca, I was going to say that we've only got 10 minutes left, and I know there are loads of questions, and I wonder whether we ought to be thinking, sorry, I'm so bossy. This is the nature of dealing with me. But I'm like, there's 10 minutes left, and I can see Rose Reed has put her hand up, and people have asked lots of questions, and maybe they're bored of hearing, not from me, certainly not from Sam and Denise. Maybe we should, just a quick reminder that we don't have time left.
Yeah, one of the questions I wanted to ask Denise, which was one of the questions on our Q&A there, was what the businesses that are starting out their journey can do. Like, where do they begin? What's the best place to start to increase female participation in leadership roles?
Well, look, again, that's a big question. There's lots of great best practice examples out there. They've got to get on top of the data. They've got to get on top of the culture. Look at leavers and joiners. Talk to their workforce. There's a huge amount of information out there in people in your team, people above you, people below you, and the right questions are just not being asked. Just gather in all that information. Your people will tell you what's right and what's wrong for anybody who presents differently to a senior white male in your organization. You've just got to listen and then act on it.
Yeah.
Sounds easy, it's hard, but that's what you've got to do.
Yeah, definitely. I'll jump across to one of our questions now. Sam, I'll go to you with this question. So this is a question that was sent by Charlotte Newell, who loves the idea of the radical redesign in the workplace. Can you give us some examples?
Well, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because the workplace has become the home place in many ways. So it's all integrating into each other. To this point about women's workload, the blueprint of the woman is that we should be able to do everything. That we should be able to cook and clean and be a supermodel and be a CEO and balance on one leg all at the same time. And I think that's sort of this idea in our minds that we have to be able to do it all. Even though we're at home, we still have to be able to do it all. It's still there. And I think we have to really start to, first of all, redesign our thinking and our own psychology before we can even think about redesigning our organizations. And of course, if everyone starts to redesign their psychology, that's going to redesign everything. So it starts with taking a look at yourself and asking yourself, why am I doing this? To Denise's point, we're seeing domestic violence going up massively in the home place right now. So it's not so easy to ask your husband or partner to do some housework if he's beating you, is one thing that comes to my mind. Another thing that comes to my mind is we just sort of need to take a strong, hard look. Like I can only talk for myself and the women I know, but I've got really, really good at cleaning toilets. I quite like it. It sort of gives me a sort of sense of peace almost. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do my cleaning toilets thing now. And so there's part of it I'm just integrating into my work day. Like I know toilet cleanings on Tuesdays. But I find myself like I use my skills. I'm a very good delegator. So I'm like chief delegator. Like my husband, I'm like, okay, you need to do this and this and this and this and this. He doesn't come to me and say, I'm going to do this today. I'm the one who's like, okay, you need to do this, this, and this. So my to-do list right now is work-based things and personal things all integrated together. But I need to be able to work. I have to be able to work. I need the peace and quiet to do it. It's 6 o'clock in the morning now. 2 kids are asleep. One's not. I already got them breakfast. My husband's looking after the other 2. We have to start to really, really share it and get a lot more direct about what that looks like. The stats that I were reading is that 44% of women are feeling that they're not. The workload is not equal in the home, but 70% of men feel like they are. So there's obviously a massive disconnect there, where a lot of men are wandering around going, I'm great, I'm doing so much more now. I did the laundry today, look at me. And for all the great men out there that do the laundry, thank you. But it needs to be more. It needs to be way more, especially if you've got a woman in your household who is the maid breadwinner and needs some kind of peace and quiet to be able to do the things that she's doing. So I think it starts at home. It starts in our own minds. It starts with some strong questioning. It starts with some really good delegation skills, very, very, very good time management, and strong boundaries, all things we've talked about for a very long time. Otherwise, you sort of end up doing emails at 9 o'clock and, webinars at 6, but it's all good. And I think that when we sort of address those things in our own mind and find other like-minded women and let go as well, like I was very interested to see the level of dust in my bedroom the other day and the cobwebs that had appeared. I was like, oh, how interesting. But I wasn't like, oh God, I'm not doing a good job, which maybe I might have been. So if if it gets dusty and the kids are eating a lot of chicken nuggets these days, it's okay, right? It's okay. You don't have to like do everything all the time. And I think that's where we need to really readdress how we feel about things and directly ask for the support of those around us.
Yeah. Denise, the other thing I really want to touch upon today is just that balance between gender and race in leadership as well, because obviously, race is something that we've been hearing a lot about with underrepresented groups. Is that something that you've seen a change in? Have you seen a change in the number of women being promoted to boards when they have come from those underrepresented groups as well?
Yeah, well, look, I think the whole ethnicity on boards has been very slow, and leadership has been very slow to take off in the UK, slower than gender. The very tragic, high-profile case of Black Lives Matter. Let's hope that some good comes out of that. I think that has raised the profile of the lack of ethnicity in the workplace, but certainly in the leadership group in a very helpful way. A little bit like we saw with the BBC gender pay gap reporting a few years ago. Everybody suddenly understood what this meant because there was activism and examples playing out in front of them. And I think people being able to internalize it themselves, what it means to be a minority and what it means to not have the white privileged life that some of us are used to, and start to think about that, start to avail themselves of some information on it and the right language in order to be able to have the conversation. I think there are many people that can't even start to have a conversation around race, and that's where modern leaders need to change and need to inform themselves. But I'm confident that will progress much stronger in the years to come. I hope it will. There is no hierarchy in terms of diversity. All forms of diversity matter. We started with women. Women happens to be where I am, but women of all forms, types, sizes, shapes, and nationalities, ethnicities matter. And they are 50% of the population and largely 50% of the workplace in most developed countries. So it is a good place to start, but clearly there are issues around race, around sexual orientation, around disability, around age, and all of those different fragments of diversity have to matter. And it's not about a separate focus and a separate target for each. It's about creating a workplace, creating an environment in the organisation where everybody, irrespective of their difference, can feel welcome, can have the opportunity and achieve their potential. And that's got to be the end game. That's what we're driving for.
Yeah, absolutely. Emma, I guess I'll direct this question at you, which is one of the questions from our attendees as well. To what extent do you think the public and private sector are making progress in this as opposed to just ticking a box? That sort of question goes on in detail. I'm not sure if you can sort of see the full context there, but just to see if you had any thoughts on that.
Sorry, what's the question?
So to what extent are the public and private sector authentically making progress versus just ticking a box for having leadership in women in leadership roles? Maybe an example in there as well.
Look, it's so broad, right? And so you can't just say the public and the private sector are not doing a good enough job or they're doing a very good job. I think, the best I can say on something as broad as that is it's not the government's job to do this for us, but nonetheless, you need accountability. And I believe, as I think everyone else does, which is you need to measure things to be able to change things, to be able to hold things accountable. And, some corners are doing wonderfully, some are doing terribly. As Denise said when we started, a third. So I can't offer more than that. And I must also say, as the sort of entrepreneur, but fully operational in my business person on this call, I'm off in 30 seconds to go do something else. But it's been fantastic being part of this, and I want Denise and Sam in my gang. So
we're in.
Delighted.
I want an autographed copy of the Wilson report on progress, please.
Now we've whizzed through. I haven't even had time to ask you all of the questions that I had today, but we've got about 2 minutes left. So can I have like just a quick 30 seconds from each of you, and just what you think the key takeaway should be for businesses that are looking to, make a start now on increasing the women in leadership roles?
I'm going to be bullshit and go first so that I can sadly sign off first. And I think probably get the fuck on with it is probably the best thing that I can offer in this situation.
Excellent.
I think I'll go next. I think just creating an environment in which all employees feel safe, enabled, empowered to speak and can have a voice is really, really important. And it's
much more appropriate and much more eloquent. I'm always the naughty one on a call.
Sam?
It's normally me that swears, so it's quite comforting. I like it a lot. I know we're rushing, and I can stay on a bit longer if anybody has any questions, but I just wanted to I want to deeply address and talk about it for a long time. We don't have that kind of time about being different, whether you are a woman of color or you have what you see as a learning difference or a disability or whatever it is. I think that you have to see yourself as unique. We're all remarkable in our own different ways. And actually, there's way more women of color in the world than there is white women. So it really is time for that rebellion. So I'm looking forward to it and coming together in ways like this to support each other and ask those tough questions, and to go back now or go forward to our workplaces and ask those questions. Have a conversation now with your board or your team or your boss or your colleague or your child or your neighbor about this webinar, and keep it front of the agenda. It's got to be at the top of the agenda. Otherwise, it's not seen as so important, but it's the most important critical thing. How can you survive as a business right now if you don't have diversity of thinking? If you have everybody thinking the same way during COVID, your ship is about to sink. You have to have that difference. It should be like number one on your list. So thank you for having me part of this today. And thank you, Denise, for the work that you do. And thank you to Tiger Recruitment for all that you're doing as well.
Pleasure. I can't thank you enough for your time today. This has been brilliant. And I have got so much out of this. It's just been really insightful, really inspirational to hear all the steps that you're making to really sort of make a stand for women in leadership roles. Thank you to everyone else that's joined us today as well. For those of you that have asked questions that we haven't had a chance to respond to, sorry we've not had a chance to go through everything, but all your comments have been fantastic as they've been coming through as well. So it's great to see that we've got your support on this as well. So that's it for today. Thank you, everyone.